Thank you very much, Karen, for that lovely introduction. Yeah, hearing you talk about things I've done, I think that I need to stop doing things for a bit, and take a break. But yeah, I'm going to talk to you today a bit about funding, kind of strategies and opportunities, with an eye towards thinking about what we might be able to do as a collective, and what kind of yeah, what sort of future funding needs we might have, and how we might be able to go about funding those needs. And one thing that Karen mentioned, which I was really happy to hear her say, was thinking about maybe in a year, because one of the things I'm going to sort of reiterate is the importance of really planning, thinking strategically, planning in advance what kind of funding you're applying for, and taking time with your applications. I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second because I have to move something across the screen. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the kind of the importance of really planning, and that's sort of what we're doing today, is trying to kind of plan a bit what we might need, and how we might go about finding it, some funding for it. So as Karen mentioned, my name is Roger Norum. I'm an anthropologist based at the University of Oulu in Finland. And I thought I'd talk a bit about, well, here's our outline for today. I'm going to talk a bit about what this funding thing is, go through some lessons learned that I've learned along the way, talk about some tips for us maybe moving forward, and then at the very end, Annika is going to very kindly lead a Padlet session on getting us to sort of brainstorm what we might want and where we might look for it. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about my own experiences in applying for and losing and sort of receiving funding. I have applied for a lot of funding since my PhD. I actually did an unfunded PhD, a doctoral degree, which I would not recommend that anyone do. It did not even occur to me when I came to the UK to do a master's degree, a sort of one-year master's degree in anthropology, which was a discipline I didn't really know anything about. And then I stayed on for a PhD, but it didn't even occur to me that someone would pay me to do a PhD. I really legitimately thought that at the time that it was only, Einstein, his progeny, and maybe Rhodes Scholars who got scholarships. No one told me that you could actually apply for funding, not being, not being a genius, and that someone would pay you to do a PhD. My supervisors, I mean, they were wonderful supervisors, but they should never have accepted me without funding, or they should have really pushed me to sort of apply for it. So anyway, as a consequence of that, once I finished my PhD in 2015, and learned about the possibility of winning funding. And when I was a kid, I always loved sort of trying to get things for free, writing away for free, sort of, I don't know, magazines or things in the mail from the back of, I think it was Boys Life that we had in the US at the time. So I kind of had this, little bit of a competitive sort of streak. And so when I found that you could actually, there was money out there for doing things like running a workshop or putting on a conference or doing some research, I thought, wow, this is really exciting. This is really interesting. And at the time, it was definitely not something I was good at because I'd never done it before. And I kind of learned from a number of people who I worked under and worked with about sort of how this thing is actually done. So this is just a list of the funding that I've won in the past 5 years. It looks really long, but if you think it's long, imagine how much longer the list of things I didn't win is. It's much longer. And at times, to me, it feels that I'm more of a funding proposal writing machine than a scientist. I mean, I do publish a lot, but I think I actually prefer writing funding applications more than I do writing scientific articles. And this is in part because I think funding applications, they can be grueling, but they're this sort of beautiful mechanism that sort of allow you to dream a bit. you don't have to sort of prove what you're saying. You have to come up with an idea and a hypothesis and a sort of plan, but no one's sort of forcing you in that to sort of, show me the data that you have and how does this corroborate what you're saying, because you don't have data yet, right? So it's this sort of really, I don't know, it's a combination for me of kind of scientific thinking, some creative writing, some kind of scenario planning, little bit of sort of narrative, novelistic kind of storytelling that you have to do. And so I've come to really like the experience of applying for funding, whether or not I end up winning it or not. Obviously, it's nicer to win if you can, especially if you put a lot of time into something. But I have lost many, many, many more than I've actually won. Still, I've done okay over the past couple of years. I've been awarded either as PI or COI over 12 million euros in research and program funding since 2015. And as I mentioned, I learned very much by writing applications alongside people who really knew what they were doing. Among them, Professor Graham Huggin, who's a professor of comparative literature and post-colonial studies at the University of Leeds. I was hired by him as a postdoc, my first postdoc position, for 4 years, and we together wrote 20 grant applications. And when I say together, I mean he wrote them. Really, I edited, I added ideas, I really kind of learned from and he still has an incredible success rate. And so I would recommend to anyone who's interested in improving their grant writing skills is to kind of team up with someone who's done it before and who kind of can show the ropes, because it is very much a skill. There is an element of luck, which I'll mention, but a lot of it, the kind of narrative strategies for how you write these things can be learned. And then the last point about me is that I started extremely small. I'll show you in a couple of slides. But I think you have to, money begets money, as they say, and it's completely fine to start very small. A couple $100 or euros for applying for something very simple, just to start out, just to sort of get yourself kind of in the mindset of what it means to apply for these things. And that really can help improve your winning streak. Okay, so as you all probably know, academics have to publish or perish. We've been told for a very long time. But there's another less famous but no less important guide to scholarly survival, and that is win funding or perish. Write proposals or perish. I mean, that's particularly true for many disciplines that for which funding is a prerequisite for being able to perform publishable research. But now many recruitment, tenure, and promotion committees also often give as much weight to grant income as they do to scholarly output. And why is that? Well, I mean, quite simply, it's because this is a new income stream for universities, right? When a researcher gets funded for a project or for an event, it's not just that researcher who benefits. It's not just that researcher's science who benefits, and then the university, but there are also overheads that often come with this funding that the university, uses to sort of fund its operation. So deans and rectors have become kind of very, very much attuned to this, and now many universities have funding offices, have funding research officers who are full-time people who sort of work with scientists to help them apply for funding, help them find opportunities. And there are lots of different types of funding. We don't just apply for them. The most common one, I think, that we probably all know is scholarships and fellowships, which tend to be awarded to individuals. But there is also sort of bigger project funding, consortium funding, which is applied for and awarded to as few as 2 scholars working together to as many as, I'm working at the moment on a Horizon Europe proposal about rewilding in Europe, and there are 43 individuals. I think it's something like 19 different partner institutions working on that proposal. So it's I much prefer writing stuff kind of individually or with 1 or 2 other people, because it's very complicated, but there's a lot of different types of constellations of sort of involvement that you can have in funding applications. There's also center funding or program funding, which are generally university level kind of batches of funding that often come from national or sort of pan-national, international funds to start a new stream of research or to fund a kind of focus center. The Center Biodiverse Anthropocenes, of which I'm drinking out of a mug, advertising them right now at Oulu, which Karen mentioned, is one of those such things. We applied for 12 million in funding to start this new transdisciplinary center on the environment, and we ended up getting awarded 8 million, which is still very, 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 very good for anything, and even for running a sort of university level program for 6 years. There's also network funding, which is something that we might consider, which is generally aimed to kind of well, in the olden days, it used to fund people to come together in person. And of course, now that we have discovered the joys of Zoom, that's less common. Certainly, that's common now. In the future, there'll probably be sort of hybrid options that end up kind of being what a lot of people do for these sorts of things. But network funding basically funds a topic or a theme, and is a means of kind of bringing scholars together around a shared common interest to do things like write other funding applications, or to publish, or just to have even reading groups. There's also workshop and conference funding, funding to fund people to go to South Africa for a couple of weeks to work with a scholar there from Finland, for example. Follow-on funding, which is funding that is awarded after you've already been awarded something. So if you've won a pilot grant or some seed funding, there is funding out there that sort of once you've proven you've had a proof of concept and you've shown that it might work, there's funding to kind of see that to fruition. And then there are prizes and awards, which are not really kind of grants that you apply for. They tend to come after you've done something great, and an institution recognizes it and awards you something. So these are the general list of kind of what's out there. And what I thought I would do now is kind of take you through 11 slides that are kind of summarized for me the most important kind of things that I've learned over the past couple of years. You can't obviously ensure, there is no golden ticket, there's no silver bullet for winning funding, but there are things that you can do to kind of make sure that you have a better chance of winning. So I thought I'll show a little video just to start. And actually, I'm just going to stop sharing and click on, sorry, I'm going to click on optimize for video, because I know in the past, okay, hopefully you'll all be able to hear this.
New York Lotto, the game that already has 112 millionaires, now gives you 2 drawings a week. With 1 drawing every Saturday and another every Wednesday, you'll have twice as many opportunities to hit those huge Lotto jackpots. Play before 8 p.m. Saturday to be in for the Saturday drawing, and before 8 p.m. on Wednesday to be in for the Wednesday draw. With new 6 of 44 Lotto, prizes will be bigger on all levels. New York Lotto, the big one. You've got to be in it to win it.
Okay, so what was that about? That was actually an advertisement that I remember from my childhood in the 80s. I really don't like gambling, and I don't play the lotto, but I do really remember that line, that tagline at the end, you've got to be in it to win it, which sounds quite obvious, sounds quite simple, but I think is a really important thing to think about. And I say this having spoken to a lot of colleagues who just get extremely discouraged after, not winning, not even sort of one, getting rejection for sort of one funding application, which is a shame, because in the end, of course, you have to write a decent application, but it is very much a lottery. It is sort of playing the odds. And the simple kind of, the simple fact of it is, if you try more times, you will have more chances to win. And I really do, I am convinced that it is a numbers game. I have written proposals for many, many months that I thought were perfect, and they didn't get to round two. I've written funding proposals in a week that I think are really garbage, and they've won a lot of money. Winning this stuff, I think, is unfortunately not a science. It is a human endeavor on the evaluation side, on the side of the reviewers, and this is really important to remember. There's just a number of things that are out of your hands when you're applying for funding, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. So I think my first lesson learned would be you have to apply for things in order to find out if you're going to win them. Should be quite obvious, but I think it's important to remember. Okay, lesson learned number two. Some people, I think, tend to think about research funding in the same way that I think about the doctor, which is that I only really need her or him when it's an emergency. And I think this is not the best way to approach it. As I said before, you need a plan. You need to know what funds are coming up, when, to plan for the long term, shape your searches. You really need to have a picture of what's out there, what's possible. There are different types of grants that fit different situations. And it can just take a lot of time to write a really good proposal, depending on what it's for and how big it is. You need to see what's out there. You need to plan it out. You need to speak to colleagues. You need to take time to have what you write reviewed by some friends or colleagues, print it out, proofread it, put it away for a couple of weeks, come back to it. This is how really good science is done, and I think this is also how really good funding proposals are written. So do not do it at the last minute. Set aside time and plan. Submit it a few days before. I don't know if this is true. It's apocryphal maybe, but I've heard of people doing reviewing for funding applications who actually look at the timestamp of when the application was submitted, and if they see that you submitted 2 minutes before the deadline, this can say something to some people about what kind of scientist you are, or what kind of writer you are, or just how much of a planner you are. So keep that in mind. I would recommend, if you can, submitting before the deadline, and double checking everything as much as you can. And also using internal deadlines can be really helpful. Maybe at the university, maybe your unit's research coordinator says, okay, if you're applying for anything, you need to send me the final thing a week before the deadline, because we need to do our own checks. Some universities stipulate that, some are more flexible. But I think these internal deadlines, we all hate deadlines, of course, but I think they can be really helpful. Okay, lesson 3, if you can talk with someone who has won, read successful proposals. The language of grant writing is very, very different. It's also very different for different proposals. Writing a European Union, European Commission, Horizon Europe proposal it's almost not English as far as I can see. It's very much a particular language, and every funding body kind of has its own sort of style, which you can read learn a bit from the call documents that they send out. But the real way to learn how that stuff is written is to read proposals that people have put through, either successful or unsuccessful ones. Your university may have a data bank where they store proposals that people have written that they're open to sharing with. Some people do like to share these things quite openly, so others don't. But you can find them out there. If you go to the website Open Grants, ogrants.org, there are now, I think, many more than 200, both successful and unsuccessful grants to have a look at across many different disciplines. They tend to be towards the natural sciences, but there are sort of social science and humanities examples out there. And also, this is quite obvious, but ask for advice, ask for feedback. Don't be afraid to share your ideas and encourage kind of engagement and critique. When I was in graduate school, I was amazed to find out that even PhD students were often unwilling to share ideas with other colleagues. It was this unfortunately extremely kind of competitive, destructively so environment. And I thought, I mean, very few of us are saving the world or inventing a sort of $1 billion idea with our social science or humanities research projects. I think it's a bit ridiculous to sort of keep things under wraps until they end up on the cover of Science or Nature. How do you make science better? You get it critiqued. You have people try and poke holes in it, and find where it can't stand up on its own. And the same goes for writing funding proposals. The more you discuss it, the better. People, especially people in different disciplines, will offer different perspectives that you might not be able to see. And one important thing to remember along with this is that funding calls, funding proposals, but also funding evaluations are very much going in the direction of multi, inter, and transdisciplinary review, which is to say that if I'm writing a sort of very anthropological research proposal, and I have a very specific idea as an anthropologist what I want to do, and I apply for some EU funding or some national funding, there's a very good chance that there are 8 people reviewing that proposal, maybe one of whom will be an anthropologist. So if I don't learn to speak to people who are outside of my discipline, with the concepts that I use, with the sort of proposed or promised impact that I might have in my project, but also in the language and the canon that I'm citing, I'm going to have less of a chance of reaching that, being able to speak to that evaluator, to that reviewer. And if you haven't done sort of multiple degrees in different fields, one way to sort of learn that, learn how this is read by people outside of your own field, is to have colleagues outside of that field read it, right? Makes sense. And it's really important to do, because the role of the evaluator, of the panelist, is becoming more and more important, and a lot more people are doing it. And a lot of funders are seeking to award money that is open to different disciplines and different fields, and the only way to have that evaluated in an efficient way is to have people from different fields and different disciplines read them. So do think about that, but again, this is all linked to making sure that you take the time to start your application before the day before it's due. Lesson number 4, as I mentioned, start small if you can. Money does beget money. If you see here, this is just a kind of screenshot of the funding section on my CV. If you look at where I started, I remember in grad school I applied for it was this incredibly titled Principals Award, which I thought sounded so benighted. And I remember getting the letter when I was awarded it. It was on very official letterhead. I was invited into a meeting with the principal of my college, a very sort of formal kind of congratulations, and they gave me £50. And I thought, Jesus, what am I going to do with £50? It was for a research project studying sort of letter writing strategies of prisoners in an Albanian prison. And I mean, £50 would not have gotten me from London to Heathrow Airport at that time. But my point here is just that even if the funding, some of the small bits of funding that you apply for don't really go very far, they are a way of getting a foothold into just writing these applications and kind of getting used to the language that you have to learn for submitting bigger things. So as you see, kind of in 2004, 2006, started very slow with just a couple €100. And then once I kind of finished my PhD, or as I was finishing, I started to apply for slightly bigger things, some assistance with a conference, for example, from my department, some funding to go do a sort of a week trip, it was like a recce trip to Thailand and Burma for some research I was doing there. These were fairly small amounts. It was nothing that was going to change my life necessarily or make even an impact on my CV, but it was a way to just get used to the process and the language of doing these things. So don't wait until you find the perfect multi-million euro project to start applying for things. Build your chops sort of by starting small and starting early. money begets money, which is to say that when people are reviewing your proposal, they're not just looking at your proposal, they're also looking at your CV, they're looking at your own track record as a scientist and as someone who can run projects or win funding. And if you have prior successes, even if they're very small, subconsciously reviewers will think that, at least one other person has trusted you enough to give you something. So maybe that makes it a little bit easier for me to trust you enough to award you this funding. Okay, lesson learned number 5.
Sorry,
even
Roger,
if you don't need this, yes.
Could you move your video panel slightly to the right? It's just in front of your
Yeah,
slides. It wasn't
of course.
a problem, but it's just a little bit in the way.
Yeah. It's creating like a block on the thing, isn't it? Okay, hang on. Is that better? No, wait, hang on. I'll get rid of it entirely. One sec. Okay, is that better?
Yes, great, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I think there are two kinds of people in the world in terms of thought. I believe that there are people who know what they think before they say or write it. And I think that there are other people who learn what they think, who discover what they think as they are saying it or writing it, as they're producing. Knowledge sort of exists as it's produced, as many of us have read and written. Whichever type of person you are, I think it's important to know the core of your project before you start writing the proposal. At least the very sort of basics of it. Of course, it's important and can be extremely beneficial to take notes, to have, to go through sort of thought bubble processes, to start drafting. But before you start writing the actual proposal, following the call text that the funder has set out, I think it can be really, really useful to come up with a one-page kind of pitch document, a sort of outline of your project, which is sort of an extended abstract that has kind of all of the core bits included: milestones, a kind of general structure, the main outputs, maybe the impact, the so what question, or the sort of why me question. And this is something that you can kind of share with peers, supervisors, or colleagues, and just get sort of, very quick feedback on the sort of initial idea. And this basically is, of course you can go talk to them, but it's nice for them to have something that's concrete, that is sort of mapped out, so that before you, spend a month or two writing a 10-page or 12-page or 60-page, in the case of Horizon Europe, funding application, you've really thought through what it might be. So this document should, generally speaking, say what you want to do, what the sort of general idea is of your project, or what you're asking for, why it's important, right? So why the funder should even pay attention to this enough to send it around to some reviewers to get evaluated. Why you, so why you're the right person or right team to be awarded this work and to carry out what you're promising. As I mentioned, needs to be written for a wider audience who's not from your field. So when you do share it around, don't just share it to your best friends or your office mates, but also try and find people in your network who come from different perspectives, from different backgrounds, and make sure that you're able to sort of communicate your relevance to society in general, and to the world in general, and not only to your kind of specific discipline, which is important, but may not be important for most of the funding that we apply for. And share it, get feedback, and discuss it with colleagues. This kind of one-page document can also be a really nice starting point for then building your actual application. And indeed, you can use it to sort of work on some other bits, like a methods section. We often have to write about how our methodological approach to doing the research that we want to do if we're applying for research funding. Or in some of the bigger consortium projects, you have kind of case studies, field sites. So you can adapt it to different applications, but this can be a really good starting point for working on something a bit longer that you turn into the actual thing you submit. Okay, some core things that I think are important to mention on the first page of the proposal itself. So what is original about your research? Why hasn't it been done before? You know, we have to do this when we write abstracts for papers that we write in certain ways, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly. But you know, it's important for someone who's funding something to know that the same thing hasn't been funded last year by their sort of competitive funding organization, their competitor. So you have to show sort of why it hasn't been done before and why it's important to give money to. Also, why is it relevant? The kind of so what question, why is this something that society needs, or why is it something that science needs? Why is this, you know, why bother? Why are you putting effort into this, and why should the funder put money into it? And this might be good to flag the impact thing, which is something that many funding agencies now want you to show societal impact in an explicit way, or public engagement. This is sort of, you know, obvious, I think, to many of us, but it's not always in scientific funding applications. There are some that do not. Some of the ERC, for example, the European Commission research grants, which are generally 5-year grants of €1.5 million to 2.5 or 3 million euros for a small team of researchers, do not require that you have impact in your application. So it's important to know in any case whether the funding that you're applying for, that you want to apply for, emphasizes this, and if so, explain or frame it kind of on their terms. Obviously, what's the literature that you're contributing to, and this may be one particular discipline, or it might be multiple disciplines, but you do need to sort of share, as you do in scientific articles, what it is that you're who you're contributing to, and what sort of body of knowledge or knowledges you're advancing. I also think it's really important, both for you and for the reviewer, to have one key research question. I mean, this is also something that you know, supervisors often tell their doctoral researchers, which is, you know, start out by keeping it simple. You know, be very clear, very explicit, be very simple about the one question that you want to address or answer, and state it explicitly. This does not mean that you can't have other questions that come into it, but I think to show that you're focused and show that you have an idea, it's important to have sort of one kind of condensed research question, and for this to appear quite high up in your, generally on the first page, I would say, if possible, in your research proposal. Along those lines, I would say that first impressions really do count. If you think about all of the work that we all have, you know, you can imagine if you know, an academic has the sort of all of the teaching, research, and admin responsibilities that they typically have, and then they've been asked to kindly review 35 you know, applications for a grant scheme. You can imagine that you know, they don't have a month to read through all of those documents, right? Those are proposals that, depending on how much the funding is for, you know, you might be lucky if you get 10-15 minutes. I think you would be very lucky if you get a reviewer spending 10 or 15 minutes on each application, if they're receiving that many. And so for this reason, like if you're writing a novel, or you're writing a monograph, or you're writing an article, or you're writing a press release, you want the first impression to count. You do not want to give the reviewer or evaluator a reason to put down your application because they're just bored. They're bored with the language, they're bored with the writing, they're bored with the idea. You need to find something that speaks to their human side, and to this end, you have to think a little bit like a novelist, in that you've got to find a kind of compelling way to sort of, you know, perk them up and stimulate their brains and their eyes in a way that makes them want to continue to read. And so these are, I've given here just 3 examples of the first sentences of 3 winning funding proposals that I've been involved in. Although I realize now that one of the The first line in the first one is spelled incorrectly. It should be modern, not modem. Although modem extractive industries might be kind of interesting to think about too. But anyway, these are kind of these are sort of just examples of first questions, first statements that kind of were attempts to draw the reader in with you know, either some kind of important ideas or some nice turns of phrase, or some language that's just generally kind of pleasing to read. So, you know, try to think like a creative writer if you can, at points of your proposal, and don't be afraid to use things that might seem kind of unintuitive when you're writing a document like this, but use things like highlighting phrases, important phrases or ideas in bold or in italics or even underlining. I probably wouldn't go as far as using different colors to highlight things in a document. For one thing, you might have you know, someone printing these things out on a black and white printer. And so the other colors that you use would get lost. But generally speaking, like when we do our CVs, I think erring on the side of sort of conservatism in forms of presentation is just a better idea. You know, this may be different in sort of industry specific funding, but outside academia, inside academia, I think it's better to aim on the more conservative side. So don't go with kind of crazy designs, crazy fonts. You can use things again like bold, italics, or underlines, but I wouldn't go too much off the beaten path from those. One thing you can do, though, to spice up your proposal and to give the reader's eye a break from all of that text, is to use different kinds of graphics and diagrams. These might be flowcharts, they might be synergy diagrams. Gantt charts are extremely popular now in proposal writing and in actually doing the research you're funded for. And these are ways of kind of, you know, communicating in a fairly succinct visual way that doesn't take a lot of time. You know, chronology, for example, how a project develops over time, or kind of interaction between different parts, different, say, work packages of the proposal. How they kind of, you know, communicate to one another, or maybe if there's an advisory board, or there's a sort of methodological component that applies to the whole project or different parts of the project, you can sometimes show that more simply in a diagram of some kind. If you don't have to be you know, Picasso to sort of do these things with you know, these days with PowerPoint and with well, with Illustrator certainly, but you know, there are simple tools that you can use to do all of these things. Microsoft Project is a really good way of doing these kind of Gantt charts, although I tend to use Excel just because it's a bit easier. And again, these do not need to be super super complicated. Okay, lesson learned number 9. We're getting to the end. Remember, we only have 11. Okay, so thinking like a reviewer. What does this mean? Again, these people have very limited time. They're only looking for, you know, they ultimately, if you're given 35 proposals to review, you probably have to come up with 5 that are fundable. And out of those, I don't know, maybe 3 get funded or 2. So it's, in a way, of course, we all want to promote good science, and we all want to sort of encourage and support early or earlier career scholars than us, or many of us do at least. But it's ultimately the reviewer's task, not really to kind of, the core task, I think, of evaluating these things is not to come up with 2 or 3 winning ones. It's basically to find excuses to throw out the 31 or 32 or 33 other ones that you're just not going to be able to fund. So ultimately, when you read through these things as a reviewer, you're looking for things to you know, justify basically tossing in the bin. So help them not do that. You know, find an easy structure, avoid jargon that they probably are not going to understand anyway. You know, present something that is visually appealing, that is not just 30 pages of you know, 11-point text at 1-line spacing, but break it up with you know, subdivisions and headings. Some of these graphics I showed. Again, bold headings and italics can be really useful. Find and again, this you can learn this by reading other funding applications, particularly successful ones, but write in an active voice. Try not to use passive, because ultimately the funding agency is going to be giving you money to do something, right? So they want to know that that the person that they're giving money to is going to actively do something. If you're writing, this task will be completed by, or by this group, or methodologies will be developed, that's a little bit less compelling sounding than our team will develop innovative methodologies, or in month 13 we will conduct 2 weeks of stakeholder workshops. So give your proposal a voice, either I or we, or at least do not use the passive voice. It can be really useful to use bullets and numbers. I wouldn't do this on a CV necessarily, but I would do it in a funding proposal. They don't have to be complete sentences. It's a way to save space. It's a way to sort of have something jump out. Again, think about sort of visual difference sort of throughout the proposal. Find ways to kind of break up the text. Okay, lesson learned number 10 is a little bit specific to the funding body, to the particular call. A number of funding applications, national funding calls, require letters of collaboration from people, either people that you know, or people that you'd like to work with. But basically, these are in Finland, for example, when you apply for money from the Academy of Finland, the national funding body, you're often required to apply for put right into your proposal these things called mobility visits, which is basically to get Finns outside of Finland, or let's say Finns in northern Finland outside of northern Finland, to visit other institutions and ultimately broaden their horizons. This is now a kind of requirement for a lot of funding, where you have to go somewhere else other than where you're based for a period of time. And so when you're doing the applications, that means that you often need to get a letter from the person or the institution that you might go to visit. And basically they vouch for you. They say in this letter, I agree that I will host Karen Morris for 2 months in my institute. She will be provided a desk, and we'll offer a seminar on her latest book, and we'll meet with colleagues regarding this project, or work on a specific component of the project that you're proposing. And so that's the kind of boilerplate language for these letters. But what I think you can also do, and it helps if you write a draft letter for for your collaborator, just to make it easier for them to kind of write what you need. In addition to the kind of the basic information, like Karen will be hosted, in June and July for in our institute. Also try to use this letter, if you can, as a way of kind of Trojan horsing your idea into the reviewer's mind, by asking your collaborator if they think your funding proposal, your research is a good idea. Ask them to say that in the letter, and say, this is a cutting edge, kick-ass, for lack of a better term, idea that is desperately needed in our discipline. And I've known Karen for 20 years. I absolutely know that she's the perfect person to do this work, and we would be absolutely delighted to host her. That's a little bit different than saying we agree to host Karen for 2 months at our institution and give her a desk and a computer. So the letters of collaboration are meant to show that indeed you will be able to do what you say when it comes to some sort of mobility or some kind of international or national collaboration. But they can also, I think, be ways of basically getting a kind of inside a kind of insider trading voice to vouch for your idea. And it's all the better if it's someone who's sort of known, or someone who has a kind of big name. But even if not, if there's language that says, look, reviewer, this is an awesome idea. I hope that you see this. I would really recommend funding this. You can't maybe say that in a collaboration letter, but you can say the same thing in so many words. Yeah, so I would really recommend kind of showing that, having that language come out in the letter. Assuming you can attach letters, sometimes you may not be able to, It might not be possible in the system, but even if they don't ask for them, there's usually a place where you can add appendices. And it may be that the appendices, if they don't ask for letters of collaboration and you upload one, it doesn't get read, but it can't hurt. It may be that actually one of the reviewers thinks, oh, what is this appendix, and reads it, and maybe officially formally can't sort of acknowledge it, but that in theory could influence their thinking. So I would argue that it's important to think creatively with these things. And then the last lesson I've presented here today is to know your market. Remember that this is a funding proposal, like when you're applying for a PhD program, or you're applying for a job, or you're trying to get your dean to agree to let you teach a course in something. Every day we have to sell ourselves in various ways, and oftentimes we have to sell ourselves or sell our ideas to people who don't really know about the thing that we're selling. So we have to do it in a sort of in a way that speaks to them. So if you don't know who the reviewers are in particular, at least try and find out from the funding agency what the review process is, right? Maybe you can find out, excuse me, the disciplines that people are recruited from for being an evaluator. And also one point that I forgot to mention, if you do start to write funding applications and find that you're successful, offer your services to various funding bodies. Usually there's a sort of online kind of form you can fill out for showing interest, but offer your services as an evaluator or a reviewer yourself. The worst that can happen is they ask you to do it and you don't have time or don't want to do it and you say no. But doing this like peer review gives back to the community. It enables us to kind of all do all of the work that we do, but it's also an extremely good way, I think, to get better at your own funding application writing, is to read other funding applications. And sort of get your finger a bit on the pulse of kind of what's happening out there. Writing proposals is a genre, as I've said. It is a very particular language, but one thing that is really important to come out, I think, whether you're writing something about a physics project for a network on qualitative or post-qualitative research methods, or a funding proposal for geography research idea, you need to communicate some kind of enthusiasm, some kind of passion for what you do. I mean, there are sort of, they tend to be natural and hard science STEM subject proposals that tend to be written in quite dry language, I would argue, from the ones that I've read at least. But still in there, you still see, even if the language is quite dry because of maybe disciplinary reasons, you're still able to kind of find kernels of passion and kernels of enthusiasm and excitement in what people write. And so it's really, really important that comes out, because ultimately, we all want to be friends with people who smile, or people who are kind, or people who are friendly, or make us laugh. Similarly, we want to fund research that is exciting, and we want to fund researchers that are excited about what they're doing, because that suggests that they might actually do a better job than someone who isn't really that into what they're doing. One comment, do I have it here? I think I took it into the office. Stephen King's book on writing is, if you don't know it, it's an extremely good kind of manual to writing compelling writing. It's not just about writing crime or novels, but also about doing academic writing. But basically learning to write kind of clearly and engagingly in a way that sort of brings your reader into conversation with you about what you're doing. Very final words. Here, my last slide. Fail times, it's normal, that's life. Life is about hearing no said to you. It's about rejection. That's okay. You need to sort of accept that it is going to happen. You are going to get rejected probably before you get accepted, and it's just part of the process, and you just have to go through it and accept it and not get discouraged. Also, try to think like a reviewer. So one good reason for starting early is if you can put aside your proposal for a week or two. You can take it up then and read it afresh with new eyes, and try and look for things to kind of critique in your own writing. Don't get so attached to your amazing ideas that you're not able to see glaring sort of gaps in what you're saying or how you're saying it. Again, it is a skill. It's a new language to learn. Give it some time. Try to enjoy the process. Again, I find I really, really enjoy the process of writing new funding ideas, just because it lets you dream a bit in ways that I think writing a lot of scientific manuscript work doesn't let us do. Again, start small. From money comes more money. Your CV is also often as important as the grant proposal itself. So make sure that you're doing sort of the things that you're meant to be doing as a scientist, just by building up your CV, and also tie yourself into the proposal itself. Show why does this CV make perfect sense for this kind of proposal. And there is no science, as I said at the beginning. There's some good approaches, but there's no one silver bullet. And for that reason, also do not be discouraged when your incredible, groundbreaking, world-changing, paradigm-shifting idea gets rejected. It might get rejected the first time, maybe the second or third, but it might be that the fourth time it ends up winning. And so I thought I would leave you just with this really inspiring line from Michael Jordan. I'm not a basketball player. I was never picked on teams in school. I was always last. But the way to get to success is by failing and by learning from those failures. And to that end, I would like to suggest that everyone do something after we finish tomorrow, which is something that I started doing a couple years ago, and I found it really, really helps with being able to take the bad news of a rejection. And that is, I've created a failure CV for myself, which basically lists all of the things that I've applied for and not gotten. So all of the jobs I applied for, all the programs I applied for, all of the funding that I tried to write, and for whatever reason was given a ding letter, either by post or by email. And I think this is important for many reasons. The main one being, it reminds you that actually you have done a lot, even if you haven't won a lot of things. And each of these job applications or funding applications that I wrote, I learned something from them, right? I might not, the day that I get the rejection, I might not think about that or acknowledge that. But ultimately, you have gone through a process of writing, of editing, of self-critique, of sharing, of having your science, having holes poked in it, and trying to make it better. And all of this is, again, a sort of process of trying something out, seeing maybe it doesn't work, or it isn't presented in the right way, or wasn't communicated really in the perfect way for that body of funding. But the next time that you do it, you'll be that much better at it. And it can be, a humbling and important reminder to, in the spirit of self-care, to show to ourselves that actually, even the things that we think weren't valued or weren't appreciated by, some university or some funding agency, we value for ourselves because we put time into that. We put our heart and soul into it often, and we have come out with something really positive from that experience. Okay, so I think I will end it there.